prior to his ranching, he had been a Texas Ranger, and that's an important part of his life, I think. He didn't like the title of Colonel Goodnight. He was never a colonel, and he was offended by being called colonel, but that was kind of traditional at that time for a lot of the men who were landholders or had been a Texas Ranger, so on, to be called colonel. To him, it was not something that he liked, but he signed his name C. Goodnight, and that led even more to being Colonel Goodnight when it was actually Charles Goodnight. Down in the part of the country around Waco, somewhere in the lower part of Texas, Mary Ann Goodnight, she was Mary Ann Dyer at that time, had become acquainted with him through her brothers working for him. She had lost her father and her mother both, and had some younger brothers, and she was quite a lady. She raised the boys. She became a school teacher, and she was busy with her life. He was busy with his, and finally, though, sometime while he was engaged in the business in Colorado, they married. She at 31 and him at 34. So they married rather late in life, particularly for that time. When he lost the money in Colorado is when he came here. And on one of his trips to Colorado, going back and forth, getting the move done, he met John and Cornelia Adair, and that was where the partnership was formed that started the J.A. Ranch. The Adairs had the money, and he had the know-how, and that was the partnership. And his time as manager of the J.A. Ranch, I suppose, was his most constructive period of his life. The herd of cattle that was developed there was quite remarkable, quite well known for being an outstanding herd. He brought in the good bulls, bred a fine herd. Lot of the men of the area worked on the J.A. for Goodnight, and that's what you hear about. The cowboys that worked on the J.A. for Goodnight is the main part, I think, of our Armstrong County history. A lot of the nesters that came in, the small cattlemen, their sons and the men themselves worked the J.A. It seems to have been a fine working ranch, a very successful ranch. Adair died, and he stayed in partnership with Cornelia for a few years, but as he became older, that's in his later years, is when he moved up into the Goodnight area and established the ranch that is known as the Goodnight Buffalo Ranch. And the town of Goodnight sprang up there close to the ranch. It was here that he built Mrs. Goodnight, who had lived in a dugout when she first came to this panhandle. He built her a fine home there at Goodnight that still stands today. It's known as the Big House, the ranch headquarters, etc., but it's the old Goodnight Buffalo headquarters building. It was built with the kitchen separate from the main house, and today that's all been connected, but it was a typical large two-story home in those days.
What's the attraction to Buffalo? Or what was his attraction?
He was a friend of the Indians as well as an enemy. He had been known as the Leopard Coat Man when he was early trail driver, Indian fighter. He wore, they think it was an antelope vest a lot, and this kind of marked him, and the Indians referred to him as that. He seemed to have been quite adept at shooting, riding, trailing, taking care of himself, and was well known among the Indians. He was, I think, disturbed that the Indians had lost the buffalo. One time when Juana Parker had left the reservation and come to the ranch, the reason was they were hungry. They needed food, and he understood the passing of the buffalo had destroyed the Indian, actually, and Mary Ann Goodnight, it is said, probably was the one that urged him to save the herd, not let them all disappear. And he had a foundation herd that he rounded up of a bull and 3 cows. He named the bull Old Sykes. And from that, he produced quite a herd of buffalo on the ranch, and sold hide, meat. It was a business, as well as saving the buffalo herd so they wouldn't be gone forever. There's a story, though, about Old Sykes chasing him on his horse and him barely getting away. And I think that was just about the end of Old Sykes. He had been around a long time and had gotten a little bit feisty. But that herd was the beginning. Old Sykes was rather famous animal on the ranch because he was the first bull. Another very famous animal on the ranch was Old Blue, that had helped his herd go north, the lead steer. I don't have any recollection of any battles he had to fight. He just rode out and said, "This is it." And he was the only rancher in the area at all. No one else was here because this was outlaw and Indian territory. And Mrs. Goodnight came with him and lived in a dugout, and was the only woman for miles and miles and miles. And not too much later, Bugbee, with his wife, came into the area and started the cattle ranch. And she too lived in the dugout, and Mrs. Goodnight and Mrs. Bugbee were reputed to have been delighted there was another woman within 100 miles that they could visit.